And I am Executive Director of the Bay Area Regional Collaborative and was Chair of the Resilient by Design Bay Area Challenge. Today, you're participating in the second of a 6-part webinar series acknowledging the 2-year anniversary of Resilient by Design. And you can go to barc.ca.gov for all the upcoming webinars. We'll have 4 more coming up. And I want to thank my partner in this effort, Amy Chester with Resilient by Design, and the help and partnership with Zoe Siegel, who was staff of Resilient by Design, is now at Greenbelt Alliance, and Lucian Go, BARC Program Coordinator. Today, we have the opportunity to hear about a lot of great work that's underway in North Richmond from local leaders of community-based organizations with a special district and the county. And that's all going to be led by Josh Bradt, who's a senior environmental planner with the San Francisco Estuary Partnership, SFEP. But before I hand it over to Josh, I want to thank both the Rockefeller Foundation, who largely funded the Resilient by Design effort, and also through some remaining funds from that Rockefeller grant, we were able to support Josh's work in helping to move forward some of the concepts that came out of Resilient by Design in North Richmond, which you're going to hear about. And I also think it's important to acknowledge Contra Costa County Supervisor John Joya, who was a real leader in helping, real supporter of Resilient by Design and the work underway there, and has really been important in continuing to move those projects forward. It's important to acknowledge local leadership, and that leadership of our elected officials is so essential to bringing people together and moving some really important ideas forward. So with that, I also just want to remind you to submit any questions you have over the course as you're hearing the presentations. And we're going to try to get to those at the end of the presentation as much as we can. We have 5 speakers who have a lot to share. So I'm not going to take any more time. I'm going to hand it over to Josh Bradt. And just one more point, you can see all the extensive the bios of all the speakers if you go to the BARC website. We're not going to spend too much time going over people's bios, but if you want to know more about each of the speakers, make sure you go to the BARC website to learn more. So with that, Josh, I'm going to hand it over to you. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you all for attending and participating in this. We can just go ahead to the next slide. And I just wanted to start with that today we're focusing on resiliency planning efforts in North Richmond, which is a Black and brown frontline community of stunning beauty in its natural environments, people, and spirit. And that will be shown in our panelist presentations. Before beginning the presentations, I want to acknowledge the legacy of racial and environmental injustice that has shaped this community. This begins with acknowledging that these lands were taken from the indigenous Ohlone Chochenyo peoples, converted into white-owned orchards until the 1930s and 40s, when during the times of overt segregation, African-American workers for the Kaiser shipyards were allowed to settle adjacent to the chronically flooding mouths of San Pablo Creek and Wildcat Creek. When those shipyards closed, the community was left with little economic opportunity, despite the existing heavy industry that continues to surround it, such as the Chevron refinery, chemical train yards, a 230-foot high closed sanitary landfill that still operates as a solid waste transfer station, and multiple auto wrecking yards. The slide that I'm showing right here is a community outreach poster that was developed about 20 years ago as part of a community-led approach to watershed restoration and shoreline open space protection. The gentleman in the corner is Whitney Dodson, who is a leader in this work as a community advocate and then as a board member of the East Bay Regional Parks District. Whitney passed in January, but his spirit and his work are carried on by so many in the community. As we work to improve environmental conditions in and around the Bay, I encourage all of us to recognize the unjust role that governmental agencies have played and continue to play in respect to civil rights, history, culture, lands. And as an outsider working in this community, I'm still trying to build relationships and trust through asking questions and listening. And so with that, I'm going to turn this over to Tim from MITHUN, who is going to actually talk about the Resilient by Design process. He was one of the team leaders, and just take it away, Tim. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Josh. Just a quick personal note for myself and many of my colleagues at MITHUN. What a real, honor and inspiration it is to be a small part in all the ongoing work in North Richmond that everyone's going to hear about today. I'll unpack a little bit of the RBD process in North Richmond and some of the outcomes from our Citizens Advisory Board and how that relates to all the great ongoing efforts that you'll hear more about. So just to start to set the scene a little bit for what sea level rise can mean in North Richmond, the graphic on the left, the blue, indicates a 6-foot level of rising water that would compromise parts of the residential areas, critical infrastructure like the West County Wastewater Treatment Plant, stormwater pump infrastructure that helps protect currently flooding zones in the area. Next slide. Josh touched on this already, but better than I can, but North Richmond is home to a real culture of activism around environmental and racial injustice. And just to, make sure that is part of our story here. There's health disparities related to air pollution adjacent to the Chevron refinery, adjacent to Richmond Parkway, and just generations of residents that have led really important environmental and racial justice work. Next slide. And our team, which we referred to as the home team, wanted to be clear about the RBD process playing a role that could amplify already ongoing efforts. This is an initial map from our early days of working together in the community, just identifying, ongoing projects. And that we just wanted to make sure that, this kind of resilience that was already being built could just be amplified, and maybe some dots could be further connected through the RBD process. Next slide. Next slide. Yeah, so all these beautiful people. It's our Citizens Advisory Board, which was North Richmond neighbors, activists, government, nonprofit leaders came together to have a conversation about all the ongoing sustainability and environmental work happening in the neighborhood, where those projects stood, what next steps might be. The CAB, as we came to call it, came together through outreach we did to local leaders and a sort of self-nominating process. Next slide. So our group strived to amplify and give continued emphasis to projects that were already underway, connect a few dots, and introduce new initiatives where the group thought they made sense in the context of a sustained community-based activism. Next slide. One of the important topics we focused on was the potential of vacant lots around the neighborhood, many of which are publicly owned, county owned, and could be a canvas for some of this work. And we, as a group, sort of unpacked 4 sort of main groupings of ideas about resilience in the neighborhood. Next slide. The first we referred to as filter, which dealt with combining stormwater filtration and air quality filtration related to both freshwater flooding and air quality issues. Next slide. And then we looked at how those could be impacting on vacant lots. This is a vacant lot near the entry of the neighborhood. Next slide. And just working through the visualization of what each of these strategies could look like. Next slide. The second strategy focused on new modes of housing that could increase home ownership in the neighborhood. Some techniques we looked at for increasing personal financial resilience were around small lot splits and the idea of a community land trust to potentially protect against gentrification. Next slide. And again, focusing on vacant lots in the neighborhood. Next slide. That could begin to be an opportunity for realizing what the sort of physical transformations could be. Next, the third strategy revolved around nature-based shoreline adaptation near the wastewater treatment plant through a living levee strategy that could also increase public access to the bay edge in the neighborhood. Next slide. so that the overlap of the natural processes and continued engagement with the community in their natural environment. Next slide. And then the fourth we refer to as relate, and it was really about increasing mobility around the neighborhood for bike and ped movement through the neighborhood, around the Bay Edge, connecting back to Wildcat Creek and San Pablo Creek. Next slide. And so you'll be hearing more about this a little later from Princess, but next slide. So this was the sort of aerial view, existing condition during that time. Next slide. So in one picture here is the kind of layering up of those strategies across the neighborhood. Next slide. But our team and the CAB always tried to focus on being a part of this ongoing process and to support work that neighbors were already champions of. So it was more, it was about more than delivering a competition graphic. It was about, setting up, being a part of the process to really get the work to just continue. And so next slide. Since RBD, you're going to hear from the other panelists about all these great efforts continuing around the living levee, around these housing models. Next slide. Around some of the urban greening and the walkable watersheds ideas that the other folks on the panel are going to talk much more about. And so that was sort of, the kind of overarching attitude of our group, that it was during RBD, it was less about the snazzy graphic or sort of massive vision idea and more about how to get to implementation for some of the ongoing efforts that were already creating, positive change around the neighborhood. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Princess Robinson. I work for Urban Tilth, a local nonprofit organization who prides itself on providing fresh, locally grown produce at low or no cost. And I started working with RBD when they came to North Richmond. I sat on one of the boards, and I started 5 years ago working with Urban Tilth in the Watershed program called Bases of Relations, where we train, educate young adults in North Richmond to restore our natural creek ecosystems. So I work in one of our main sites is Wildcat Creek, Lower Wildcat Creek, which runs through the heart of North Richmond, located in one of the in front of the only elementary school called Verde Elementary in North Richmond. And there we, we pull invasive species, plant native plants, erosion control, etc. And then when I started the Watershed program 5 years ago, we went to multiple creeks around the Bay Area to work in their sites as well. And we would come back to Lower Wildcat Creek, and we noticed that our creek doesn't have the amenities that most or all of the creeks around the Bay Area has. And so, we started this community visioning process that we kind of wanted to collect a lot of data from community and see what they wanted. So next slide. So we host community engagement events at Wildcat Creek. We also host volunteer events, cleaning up a really hot spot, illegal dumping area in North Richmond, their ditches. And so we throw volunteer events. And within the 2019, we had over 200 volunteers, which is really great for us in North Richmond. Next slide. So within our visioning process to beautify Wildcat Creek, we collected over 98 community surveys. And as you can see, a lot of people advocated for more benches, trash cans, and other amenities. We also have completed different activities as far as mappings and fishtails. We worked with MITHUN to come up with conceptual designs for the future of Wildcat Creek. We completed a short commercial on YouTube, so you can look that up as well. We hosted a community workshop. We also have a committee of 7 members who are leaders, stakeholders in the community, and also residents. And then, yeah, we have a final report that we sent out to all of resident stakeholders. Next slide. And so this is how we're going to vision North Richmond. Is one of the mappings that community residents completed. And then we have some conceptual designs on the side of what we want to see at the creek, at the trail. Next slide. Next slide, please. And you can skip this slide as well. Sorry about that. Yeah, and so this is a picture of our trick-or-treat at Wildcat Creek Trail, where the kids get to come out and get really engaged in the creek. We host activities like trash pickups, little seedlings you can do as well. Next slide. This is our North Richmond employee baseball game, employee and resident softball game, barbecue, trash pickup. Again, we engage residents in activities and engage them into Wildcat Creek Trail. Next slide. This is a picture of one of our residents at our volunteer day picking out a tadpole in the ditches, and then some of our volunteers getting a lot of trash out, big bulky items out of the ditches as well. Next slide. We also host couples yoga at Point Pinole Regional Shoreline, which is a really good deal. And this is one of, on the side, this is one of my efforts in community outreach and getting people to fill out the survey. Next slide. And we also host Zumba walks down the trail. We do Zumba at the baseball park located right next to the trail. And then the picture inside of that is just volunteers. We do all arts and we implement culture into our activities as well. Next slide. And so that was a visioning of Wildcat Creek. That's what we did. And we are looking to beautify Wildcat Creek Trail. A lot of parents walk their children on that trail, as do I. I'm a North Richmond resident, community activist. I walk my son on that trail before and after school. And so, yeah, that was a visioning Wildcat Creek. And this slide right here, I'm also involved in another initiative in North Richmond to revitalize vacant lots. Which is community resident driven. This initiative is community driven. And so me and my co-workers, we designed this tiny home eco village to put as an alternative housing solution in North Richmond and trying to get people into homes. And so if you want more information on that, definitely can email me about that. But this is one of the demonstrations of a tiny home, and it's it's upstairs, downstairs in this home right here. And we want to put at least like multiple of them on one lot. So we're hoping to revitalize these vacant lots in North Richmond. And that's my presentation. Thank you guys so much. Thank you to all of our supporters. Thank you, MITHUN, for working with us. Thank you, Resilience by Design, for working with us as well. Community residents and stakeholders in North Richmond, thank you very much. And yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you, Princess. Yeah, we have been here at the Watershed Project. I'm Juliana Gonzalez. I'm the executive director, and we have been working in North Richmond for 15 years. And recently, a lot of our projects have been in collaboration with Urban Tilth and Princess. And we were invited to be part of the Resident by Design process as well. And I was part of the Citizen Advisory Board. And since then, we have used a lot of what we learned from kind of like this long-term planning process to kind of like create more of like buckets of kind of aggregating some of the work we were already doing in the community. This is just a picture of a garden tour we did with some of the residents that are part of our Hope Garden project. Next slide. But we have many initiatives in North Richmond. We have 8 active projects right now in which we are mostly working in kind of the filter category that came out of the Resilient by Design, and some, so we mostly have been focusing on the urban forestry component and the urban greening component of the filter, but we also collaborate closely with the county watershed program in some of their green infrastructure projects that are more about filtering stormwater. So we also have been in that category of the filter, like doing some water needs assessment in the community to identify large infrastructure projects that could benefit the community water needs. So for that project, we have hosted many community workshops and have distributed surveys and gotten feedback from the community as of like what are their water needs, not only in terms of flooding, but also drinking water or like sewer water, or just kind of like the space around Wildcat Creek, which is an area where we have worked for many years in partnership with the community and also with the Costa Conservancy during Costa Cleanup Day. We are the coordinators for a lot of the cleanups. But in the second category, we have done a lot of work is in the transportation, the active transportation planning. So we partner with the county and Urban Tilth to submit a proposal for the Costa Conservancy to start greening not only the neighborhood through the urban forestry program, but also some of the main corridors, transportation corridors, so that we could have through complete streets, even if the county only had funding for the bicycle pedestrian, we will then add the layer of the urban forestry or other urban greening. And so the next thing has been like working also to help Princess with some of her like Wildcat Creek visioning and trying to secure funding for some of the amenities that can be maybe placed along that corridor. So we have some good news on that. And the last project that for us is really important is to try to find funding for maintaining some of the green infrastructure and providing employment in the community. So we have been hiring people in the neighborhood as block ambassadors to be part of our clean and green initiatives, where they do some cleaning and also do some gardening and tree pruning. And so that has been an anchor for us in the neighborhood, since we are not residents in the neighborhood, but we have many residents that are part of our team that we hire for this long-term maintenance projects. So next slide. So this is the first of the pilot projects. This is a project that was funded by the Conservancy, awarded to Contra Costa County, and it was facilitated by the Watershed program, and John Steere will speak a little bit more about this, but just very quickly, this is the first successful project in which we have a collaboration between the county and the nonprofits. You will have many elements, including a green infrastructure facility along the farm at Urban Tilth, and then like an urban greening element along the first mile, last mile along Fred Jackson Way, and then in the neighborhood, you will have kind of an urban forestry program along the Safe Routes to School, which connects Verde Elementary to the after school program at Jill Street. Next slide. So the urban forestry program was started as an adopted tree program, following a little bit the model from the rest of Richmond. The Watershed project secured an initial grant from Cal Fire to plant, Cal Relief to plant the first 50 trees, so that we could develop the manual of like how to get the permits with the city, with the county, and how to kind of coordinate the different elements. And so we have successfully found 50 homes for 50 trees. So those were planted last year, and with the Walkable Watersheds grant, we'll be planting an additional 50 trees this year, hopefully. We'll see how it goes with the health crisis, but the idea of this is that the trees are either planted in the planting strip or on people's front yards, as long as it provides shade over the sidewalk. given that the sidewalks are really very narrow in this neighborhood. So this is one of the happy families that receive one of the trees. We have paired this with other urban greening initiatives we have in the neighborhood. So we currently have also a project called the Hope Gardens, where we plant like drought tolerant gardens underneath the tree. So the idea is that we will remove all the grass and then like just put like drought tolerant, like beautiful gardens that are planted with the neighbor, and our block ambassador team helps with the installation and some of the maintenance and operations. Next slide. So just like some early success stories from just the last 2 years, we have planted 50 of the 100 trees that we are hoping to have in the community by the end of the year. We have completed 7 out of the 12 Hope Gardens, so greening about 4 complete blocks. We have started drafting the guidelines for the county for an urban forestry program. We have hired 8 block ambassadors that have been with us almost for 2 years, doing different maintenance and operations in the neighborhood. And we have completed the water needs assessment, identifying potential sources of funding, kind of long-term related to water. And one of the most exciting things we're doing, also in partnership with John Steere and the county and Supervisor John Joya, is to start looking for a new way of funding maintenance and operations through a green benefit district for disadvantaged community. Next slide. And I think that this will really be very innovative if we were to break this one and understand how to do this in this community. It will really be game changing for the entire Bay Area. Right now, we are starting to work on the feasibility study for it. We have a grad student that we found with John Steere that we're working with to guide her in developing kind of the first study that shows kind of like the different models that we have outlined. And this type of disadvantaged community green benefit district is not intended to be parcel based. It is supposed to be something new. So we want something that is either the funding mechanism or is kind of the receptacle that takes funding. So we have been discussing many ways in which this could be a tool for residents to directly invest in their communities and also get employment from this type of kind of organizing structure that can be kind of governed and managed at the neighborhood level. So the things that you can get from this is that you can get some of the benefits of this community benefit and business improvement districts, but you have the landscaping and the kind of like cleaning of the streets and some of the kind of like anti-dumping done by neighbors and crews that are like sourced. So next slide. And in the case of other green benefit districts, like this type of organizations can do some of the capital improvements, so they could actually do some of the installations. And the idea is that you will hire then the nonprofit that is best suited for it. So if like there was a new GI close to Urban Tilth, maybe the Urban Tilth crew will be better suited to do it, but they can do it through the funding that is specified for maintenance and operations or for the capital improvements locally, so that you can actually really have some sources of funding long-term. And the other thing that it will do is we'll do some of the hiring of the local workforce, which tends to be something difficult to do sometimes for the very small nonprofits. So this will give a little bit of the kind of capacity building that is required for this to be sustainable. And some of the examples of things that they could do will be like the urban forestry components, trash and litter removal, graffiti abatement, nursery management, local workforce trainings and crew management, and also kind of like the contractual and like admin pieces. And the idea is not to displace the local nonprofits. The idea is to just aggregate the funding that can help with the maintenance and operations. Next slide. I think is that the last one? Yeah. So we work very closely with John, so I'll have him to talk about the pieces that relate to this piece. Okay.
So I guess I'm up now. Can people hear me? Okay, well, unfortunately, we have a bit of a poor connection here, so I'll do my best in the midst of this presentation. My name is John Steere. Can you hear me? Fine?
We hear you. We hear you.
Yes, my name is John Steere. I'm a watershed planner for Contra Costa County. A watershed program is actually part of the flood control district for the county, which has been very active in North Richmond for quite a few years, so I won't go into that history, but and Urban Tilth and the Watershed Project have been partners in a significant undertaking that we've been doing. It's kind of a prelude to the Resilience by Design insofar as it happened. We started this undertaking of the North Richmond Watershed Connections Project even before Resilience by Design was underway. So it's kind of like an expression of that, the principles of Resilience by Design in action, hopefully in the next few years. So let's proceed to the next slide. Well, actually, since Juliana covered most of this, you can see, by the way, in here is like it really expresses the Resilience by Design principles of filtration through stormwater and GI, urban greening, placemaking, the thrive and relate principles. And so this really is like an initial effort or template for what Resilience by Design for North Richmond is about. Next slide, please. So I think here I just want to just outline there are three major components to this project, which by the way was funded. I want to give our thanks to the Coast Conservancy for close to $1 million grant for this design and implementation project, which includes Fred Jackson Way rain gardens of Urban Tilth, the first mile, last mile tree installations, which basically takes what is a complete street that Contra Costa County Transportation Engineering Division is undertaking, that they got a grant for, and making it a green street. For this section shown here. And then the third piece is what was described by Juliana Gonzalez, the clean and green neighborhood adopters tree and creek cleanups and so forth. So next slide, please. Next slide. Maybe
Looks like John is frozen.
Yeah, it's frozen on my screen. Unfortunately, you know, I'm doing the best I can. With the, oh yes, I see what it is now. We're on a different slide. Okay, you know, the rain garden slide. Just what I think is would be the actual highlight of the Fred Jackson Way Green Street will be the rain gardens themselves, which are right by San Pablo Creek, and it'll be probably the best opportunity for really showing how this effort of both Urban Tilth and the Watershed Project to hire local community members to learn how to do, whether it's community gardening, whether it's learning how to become a green collar worker in maintaining and building green infrastructure here and perhaps throughout the county in the future. Next slide, please. Yeah, it just shows sort of the existing location for the Fred Jackson Way rain gardens, which, as I mentioned, are just south of San Pablo Creek and will feed into them, so provide extra filtration for stormwater going into that creek. I should mention that the Urban Tilth property, about 3 acres, is actually owned by the Flood Control District. It's leased in a long-term lease that was facilitated through the efforts of John Joya and our Flood Control Division. So that's part of our partnership here. You can see in this slide also how the rain gardens are adjacent to both the pedestrian walkway and the bike path. Next slide, please. In this case, we show the length of the first mile, last mile Green Street that's being shown here. It goes into the quote unquote, you might call it downtown of North Richmond, which is being one of the vacant lots has recently developed into a mixed-use development. So it's really helping to provide some additional vitality and placemaking features to North Richmond. Next slide, please. Yeah, so you can sort of see, this is just showing the segments of the first mile, last mile Green Street, and where we're going to do bulb outs and add in trees, which will be part of the it's both an urban greening feature and it's a GI feature in the bulb outs. Next slide. And this shows just again how they connect up and why don't we go to the next slide? Now, this has already been addressed by Juliana, so I won't go into this further. This is just showing the location where the adopted tree and voluntary cleanups are occurring, sort of the residential section of North Richmond. Next slide. Are we frozen? Oh, good, not. Okay, and this was, again, Juliana was talked a lot about adopted tree. I think the piece I want to mention here that she didn't mention is that, you know, the county, while in its climate action plan would really like to see street trees and other, you know, urban vegetation or urban greening happening throughout the county, we have no basis financially from a maintenance standpoint for maintaining these trees. So we have been more looking for alternatives. Well, this is one right here where essentially the street trees will be planted in the front yards of people's homes and they'll be maintaining them. This also happens to coincide with the fact there's very little sidewalk strip for the trees anyway. So it's both a necessary thing and a desirable in terms of maintenance to have owners taking stewardship responsibilities for these trees. And obviously the Watershed Project has been really doing its part, more than its part, in kind of educating and engaging these community members in doing that. Next slide. So I should mention sort of the larger context for this. Indeed, this came out of the county's green infrastructure plan, which was actually done among all the municipalities in Contra, Costa, as well as other municipalities throughout the Bay Area. It's basically a blueprint for how Contra Costa will transform stormwater management and, you know, basically use these principles of filtration of it through these rain gardens, et cetera. So it's a living document, and among the major projects there is Fred Jackson Way. This is really the first demonstration project from the GI plan, and other demonstration projects will be shown in the next few slides. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to go through this other than say that we have, you know, for the early implementation project, this is one, the North Richmond Watershed Connections project, especially the Fred Jackson Way Green Street. And we also had a major chapter in funding options, of which the Green Benefits District was one of the options. Next slide, please. Now, here is, we're showing the potential GI projects from the North Richmond. You can see Fred Jackson Way in this slide. You can see Park Boulevard with Green Street and Market Avenue Green Street. Indeed, we're looking to create what we're referring to as a North Richmond Green Streets corridor that will connect. You can see the staging area to the left to the Bay Trail, which rings the transfer station, formerly landfill. And then it will connect via PAR down to Fred Jackson Way, then east to Market Avenue, which is now being proposed by our transportation engineering division to be a complete street. And we're looking, of course, ourselves and Watershed Project and perhaps Urban Tilth to transform this into a green street to connect to Rumrell to the east, which is going to be built in the next few years as a green street, one of the largest in the East Bay, combining complete street and GI features. Next slide, please. And here you can see all the elements put together. You know, segment 1 would be Park Boulevard for this North Richmond Green Streets corridor. Segment 2, which will be under construction the next few years, is Fred Jackson Way, and segment 3 would be Market Avenue. And of course, we do not have funding yet for either segments 1 or 3, but probably segment 1 will look to Park Boulevard is the one we'll look to get funding for next, probably through a grant. Next slide. This just shows, you know, here's what Park Boulevard look like now. It's a major access point to the landfill, the transfer station. It often gets trash, you know, and you can see in the simulation of what could be there as a green street, this is what it might look like. Next slide, please. And here's what Market Street could look like as our green street simulation again, and showing both a bulb out feature on the left and a rain garden on the right as options there. There's really room for making it into a full-on green street in terms of having a bike lane because it's just too narrow. But that's something we'll look at how to design this in a manner with bulb outs, much like Fred Jackson Way, to be a green street connecting to Rummer Boulevard in San Paulo. Next slide, please. Okay, I gather you went next slide, but unfortunately my Wi-Fi is a little bit off here. So we're basically on the funding strategies, and we already discussed the Green Benefits District. Juliana did a good job with that, so I don't want to have.
I'm afraid that
Conservation.
John, we need to wrap up to get to the next speaker. Can you
yeah, we're ready to go. Yeah, I'm ready to go. So I just want to thank John Joyous' office, our own flood control division, the Watershed Project, Urban Tilth, the Coast Conservancy, and Transport Engineering for the basis for this whole undertaking. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Andrew Clough. I'm the Deputy General Manager for the West County Wastewater District. And you go to the next slide, please. And we are a wastewater district serving West Contra Costa County with a population of about 100,000 commercial, residential, and industrial users. Our treatment plant is located, as you've seen in a number of these slides from the earlier presenters, is located right on the marsh between San Pablo and Wildcat Creeks. And one of the things I wanted to point out here first, this is the district's vision statement, which has been recently worked over again by our board of directors, and following along from this, there are a series of strategic goals in our mission. But I'm going to just take a moment to take a quick look at it, and it's to create a holistic plan for environmental stewardship through efficient wastewater management, extensive community engagement, inspirational leadership, and integrated partnerships. And I did just want to emphasize that because the wastewater district really wants to be an integrated partner, wants to work with the community and be a big part in helping to provide environmental stewardship and do what we can with our waterfront, while at the same time protecting the critical infrastructure, which is essential for basically what we consider civilized living in our area, that you can brush your toilet and that water goes, it gets properly treated, and in our case, a very high percentage of it gets reused, recycled, and then used by East Bay Mud and sent off to Richmond Refinery for one primary use. Next slide, please. The stakeholder working group and a number of the stakeholders are here. They've talked, and I appreciate that. And I would like to say first that I want to express my appreciation for all of the work that has gone on over the last couple of years. I am fairly recent to the West County Wastewater, starting in the fall of last year, and since then, for obvious reasons, we've had quite a few less than normal circumstances as we've been trying to run our operation, make changes, and engage with the community and the stakeholders. Although here we are out with Josh and Supervisor Joya on a tour out along the existing levee and marsh waterfront out in front of the treatment plant. And what we're talking about doing is, and we can move to the next slide, please. Here's a quick overview of the area. We've seen the slide on the picture on the right shows a living levee study alignment. And that was talked a little bit about by Tim at the very beginning of this presentation. And part of the Resilient by Design analysis and work that was done, it was identified this area is a great area to give this a try and to see what we can do. And what we're trying to do is work in collaboration with our partners, our nonprofit stakeholders, the government agencies from the county to the city to East Bay Regional Park District, as well as trying to work with Chevron and Republic Services. The real challenge is going to be, can we do this as a regional collaborative? Can we build 5 miles of levee and generate, close to 18 acres of transitional upland habitat? Or are we going to have to do this more on an individual basis? And I say that because we recently gotten, and I want to thank the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority, we've recently received a grant from them of around $640,000 to work on preliminary planning and design for the two concepts of either trying to do this by ourselves, and when I say by ourselves, let's see the next slide. We can. Well, okay, that's the aerial view. We've seen that a few times. From right there, we're looking out across the bay. Can you go to the next slide, please? This is again the marsh and the levee, and this is the area where we'll be talking about. It's out in front of the West County Wastewater Treatment Plant, where, if necessary, going by ourselves, we're committed to looking for the funding after we go through this design process and concept, and to create at least about 0.6 of a mile of living levee with the upland transitional habitat, helping us with flood control protection, increasing access to the bay, including hopefully filling a gap in the Bay Trail. You go to the next slide, please. This is just, again, I wanted to thank the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority. This was just a quick little snippet of our application, which they approved, and we greatly appreciate that, because without that, we wouldn't be able to be going forward. Next slide, please. And this is what I was talking about, is the collaborative or go it alone. You see right there in the center, little red box, that's essentially our treatment plant operations. And then the dark blue line running from all the way up closer to Point Pinole by Giant Marsh, all the way down to Chevron and the Castro Cove, that would be the area that we intend to study the alignment with this grant. And the section right in the center, if we can't, get full collaboration with our various partners, like I said, we are committed to doing work right there between Wildcat and San Pablo Creek at the treatment plant. But we really think it's going to be much more beneficial to be working with all of our stakeholder groups, including the large property owners adjacent to us. With the next steps in the process are for us to develop our work plan, continue the stakeholder engagement, and then start the study on this work with the goals. The goals are to create transitional upland habitat, provide flood protection to the critical infrastructure, and improve the shoreline access and education opportunities, including, as I mentioned, a gap in the Bay Trail. And I'm sorry, I'm trying to move real quickly here because I know we're pressed on time. So go to the next slide, please. There we go. Thank you. And a view out over our beautiful sludge lagoons and our solar panels. But again, we're open to questions and be happy to give some more detail. But in the interest of time, I was trying to speed along there for you, Josh.
Those are indeed beautiful sludge fields.
Yes.
Gorgeous. So this is the time where we're expecting some questions to come through from the audience, and I'm actually only seeing one question, and it's for Juliana's presentation, and the question is, can you explain what is alternative compliance, which you mentioned in the alternative maintenance and operation component?
Yeah, so this is something new for a lot of the municipalities. They are kind of trying to define this better. So the idea is that if you have like you have to comply with your C3, and maybe you, instead of making the infrastructure within the premise, maybe you can have like contribute to a larger GI facility that is next to your premise. So maybe that will be a potential solution. So it's like not kind of offsetting something that you don't have to do necessarily alone, but maybe you collaborate or fund something. So that's why they were considering that could give maybe funding for kind of like collecting these funds in the alternative green benefit district or disadvantaged community green benefit district, so you can receive that funding to then help with the maintenance of a larger GI.
Got it. Thank you. Another question that comes from our friend at the regional board, Javier, wants to know, has the wastewater treatment plant been consulting with regulatory agencies on the horizontal levee project yet?
Well, Javier, of course, we're going to have to consult with the regulatory agencies. At this point, it's all conceptual, and we are been taking a look, at what we might have to be doing. But that's a very important component of what we're going to be embarking on as we finish the work plan with the Restoration Authority, and then develop our consulting team to go forward. It is the preliminary planning and design up to 30% of the levee, and an important component of that is going to be reaching out to the regulatory agencies and finding out what the requirements will be, how we can work through the process, and of course, from our standpoint, also pointing out the great benefits of this ecotone slope living levee, and then seeing if there's any benefits, like we talked about, to a collaborative approach. And that collaborative approach applies to both the regulatory agencies as well as the private property owners adjacent to us.
That's right. And I'll also say that I think what that project is trying to do is get on the schedule of the Bay Restoration Regulatory Integration Team, or the BRIT, and that does this kind of consultation early on in these projects. So that is certainly something that is trying to get accomplished this year. Another set of questions to Princess. How many tiny homes are planned for in the tiny home eco village, and who will be acquiring and managing them? Do we know that information?
Yeah, so I am a fellow inside the building, representing the Building Power Fellowship, in which was created by Richmond Land, which is an organization who came about, and they're turning themselves into an CLT. And so the tiny home eco village was developed with community, and our plan basically right now, because we just went through a conceptual phase as well, and we're diving deeper into the actual planning of the development of this tiny home eco village. And so our plan is to create like different size tiny homes that relates to like families or a single person, or so maybe it'd be like a small cottage, an upstairs, downstairs, just different tiny home eco villages that people can actually build themselves with organic materials. We also plan to implement like rainwater catchment systems. We plan on implementing like different solar panels, things like that, that's gonna make the tiny home eco village sustainable. And then we have this financial model that we're working on right now. It's called being a tiny investor, to where we ourselves can, purchase like a small tiny home at, very low cost, roughly around like $50,000, and we can become that tiny home eco investor, put someone in a home, and then you get a small return on that. And so yeah, so that's our plan right now, although we're working with different agencies, different developers, and trying to really structure that this model that it could be sustainable.
Thank you. Okay, it looks like I think we have two more questions here. One is, I think this might be for either Juliana or John, and it is, can someone explain more about the concept of walkable watersheds?
The name came because the lower Wildcat Creek and San Pablo Creek cross this neighborhood, and so people live with the creek, but many times don't feel connected to it. So what we wanted to do was to have a proposal that was about walkability more than bicycle connectivity. So it was more about the sidewalks at the beginning, And so that's why the urban forestry was important for like the safe route to school. Like the kids are taking in the kind of walk, like they walk from the school to the community center. And so that like walking school bus like needed kind of a safe route. So that's kind of the beginning of it, like connecting basically Walcott Creek to the kind of the facilities in the community, but then also the farm is at the other creek, it's in San Pablo Creek. And both of these creeks like are beautiful assets for the neighborhood if they were clean and had amenities and were like more accessible. So the idea was to highlight the potential that the neighborhood has of having these open spaces be something that can be an asset and not and like right now it's an eyesore and it's a problem. So it was just kind of bringing that up, but it was just the name of the proposal and kind of the spirit of what we want to do.
Thank you. It looks like I was just really cruising the chat, and it turns out there's a whole bunch of questions on our Q&A panel that I just couldn't get my cursor to go over. A lot of these are about, or a number of the questions are about timelines for completion. The Fred Jackson Way, Green Street, is there a timeline for completing that? Similar for the Living Levee design, is there a timeline on that? So let's look at those two. Do we have timelines for either of those that we want to share?
I could start off, Josh. On the living levee, I also thought there was a question there that living levee, horizontal levee, and is there a difference? And I'll respond quickly to that. Maybe Tim wants to add a little bit to that as well. But essentially, they're the same. I mean, a levee, you've got to build up some vertical height to compensate for the fact that the sea level is rising. And the idea of instead of just building a, strictly a vertical levee with a straight flat wall that's going to increase wave energy pounding against it, is that the horizontal or living levee provides a slope out in front of it out toward the bay that, it's a horizontal, that's a geometric discussion of it. The living levee would be more the biological discussion and say on that horizontal slope, we're going to encourage a natural habitat and improve and increase the upland, that transitional upland habitat. So as far as a timeline, we just got awarded the grant. We're going to our board to have, acceptance of that. So we'll be going through a couple of months of putting together the work program and the agreements, getting our consulting team together. And then we're looking at that point, probably a 12 to 18 month process to go through the planning and conceptual design. And a lot of that is, it is going to take some time. If we truly want to have a collaborative partnership, this doesn't happen overnight. It could go faster if I just said, forget it, we're not interested in partners, I want to build a wall and surround the treatment plant. That I could do a lot more quickly because that's pretty straightforward. But that would not be as much of a benefit to the community, nor would it be as much of a benefit to our neighbors and our partners. So we're looking about 12 to 18 months in that planning process. Tim, if you wanted to add anything on the horizontal or living levee, or you think I covered it?
I think you got it. Yeah. Sorry, Josh, go ahead.
Oh, I'm gonna add two more questions to the levee discussion before I get back to Juliana about the timeline on Fred Jackson. And I know we're running out of time, but the questions really, these are engineering questions. And one is for the levee, does the railroad present a challenge or an opportunity? And the other one is, how do we address flooding on the inside of the levee, water trying to come out and get to the bay? So do you might have just a couple words on those two?
I could, but Tim, you want to respond to that one? I think you might be in a little better position.
I don't know. I think you've got the mic. Go, Andrew.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Behind you.
The railroad, possibly. I don't know that the railroad's either affording us that much of an opportunity or that much of an impediment in its alignment. Perhaps it's certainly not right in the center of the area we're talking about by the wastewater district. It could be over towards Chevron and possibly up by Giant Marsh, but that area's already got quite a marshland out in front of it. The other question,
In flooding and letting that water
Oh,
out.
the flooding. Well, absolutely. That's critical. We have to let the water be able to get out as well. And as sea level rises, it's going to be encroaching, and we can't, you know, we can build a wall out in front of the treatment plant, but if we aren't watching what's happening on the flanks along Wildcat and San Pablo Creek, then we aren't doing ourselves much help there. But we do absolutely have to be able to let the water get out. And so that's a big part of what this preliminary planning and design we'll be looking at, is conceptually what can work before we get into the more detailed design. And that's what we refer to it as a 30% of the final design. And those are the kinds of critical questions that have to get answered before we start to develop documents that get us into actually constructing something and trying to permit and work, you know, with the regulatory agency to get all the permits. So that is absolutely a big part of the first study.
It's 1 o'clock. I'm really sorry to say I'm not sure how to go forward. I might even defer to Allison to let us know what happens when this magic hour strikes.
Thanks, Josh.
Questions left. I'm not sure how to go forward.
Yeah, you know, that's a good question. Well, first of all, I want to thank all the speakers. I want to thank all the time you've taken today to share your perspectives and also all the great work that you're doing. I know this is above and beyond, and I think it's really a value to the region, and also Josh for your excellent moderation. This question around all these great questions we've gotten, I think we're going to have to come up with a plan to maybe provide a summary of all the questions. And if some of our speakers would be willing to take a little time after this to answer some of those, and we'll make those available to everybody that's been participating in these conversations. I also just wanted to note, this session was really designed around taking local best practices and some of the leading work that's being led by Urban Tilth or the Watershed Project and our county and the West County Wastewater District, and also apply it to the regional scale. I mean, we've had examples of tiny homes that can be applied in other communities. We have creeks that need to be shifted from being more engineered to something natural. We have wastewater treatment plants that need to be addressed through some means to make them more resilient, and we have those all around the region. So as a regional agent, someone that works with regional agencies, I think we're thinking about how to support this local work, which some of it has been supported through the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority with the Horizontal Levee Project, but also how do we lift up these best practices, both support them and the work that's happening in North Richmond and other places, but also help take that learning and apply it in other places of the region. So thanks so much. The next session actually is digging into creeks a little bit more. We're going to be looking at different creeks around the bay and natural solutions for those. And again, applying those best practices. We're going to hear a little bit more about the Bradt, which Josh alluded to. So I hope you'll be able to join us next week. And thank you so much. Thanks to everyone who's participating. We got 4 great conversations ahead of us. So thank you.